Welcome everyone to this information session presented by Accessible Pharmacy Services. We are currently in the process of letting people in into the meeting, and we're going to give it a couple minutes and we will get started shortly. So thanks for joining us today. Again, everyone, we're just giving a couple more minutes to let more people join this information session, and we will get started shortly. So thank you for joining us. Okay, well, it's about 3 minutes after the hour, so we will go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to the Chicago Lighthouse's informational session on the groundbreaking ICVP project. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with the Lighthouse, the Chicago Lighthouse is a social service organization, and we serve people who are blind, visually impaired, disabled, or veterans. We serve these communities through programs in low vision rehabilitation, education, and employment services, as well as independent living services. Now, about the session, this 45-minute session is presented by Dr. Philip Troyk and Dr. Frank Lane. Doctors Lane and Troyk, they are both from the Illinois Institute of Technology, excuse me. I am Sandy Murillo, and I am the associate producer here at the Chicago Lighthouse Media Center. And I will be moderating this discussion today. Now, For today's session, we will leave room for questions at the end. We will leave about 10 to 15 minutes of room for anyone that might have questions. So if during the session you have any questions that come up, please add them in the chat box, and Dr. Lane or Dr. Troyk will answer them at the end of the presentation. Also, for those of you who may need captions, you can enable the captions by pressing the closed captions button in the bottom menu bar, excuse me. Now, we have hosted several information sessions and interviews about the ICVP, but in case you are tuning in for the first time, or you are learning, or you are here to learn more about what's new with the ICVP, well, the ICVP stands for the Intracortical Visual Prosthesis, and Drs. Troyk and Dr. Lane, they will be sharing information about it and how you can learn more, and also about how you can get involved in this project. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Dr. Troyk and Dr. Lane, welcome back, and it's great speaking with you again.
It's great to be also with you again here, Sandy, and with my colleague, Dr. Lane. And I can briefly introduce myself, and then Dr. Lane can do so. And then we can tell you about some of the exciting things that have been happening on the ICVP project.
Yeah, tell us a little more for both of you, how you are involved with this project and a little about your background.
So I'm currently the executive director of the Pritzker Institute of Biomedical Science and Engineering, and I'm also a professor of biomedical engineering at the Illinois Institute of Technology University in Chicago. I'm very pleased and proud to be the leader of an 8-institution team that has for over 20 years developed technology for clinically testing a novel brain-based implanted electronic system called the ICVP, whose purpose is to look at implementing artificial vision for people who have profound blindness. Frank?
Yes, my name is Frank Lane, and I'm the psychologist in the group. I'm also one of the co-principal investigators of the study. And I've been working on this project since 2009, trying to understand potential participants in this study, why they would be motivated to have prosthetic artificial vision. But specific to the study, I'm involved in recruitment and also assessment. And I also run a support group for participants in the study.
Now, back to you, Dr. Troyk. You know, we've mentioned the ICVP several times already in these few minutes, but for those who don't know what it is, can you explain, first of all, what it stands for and what it does?
Sure. The ICVP is a short name for the intracortical visual prosthesis. Intracortical just means that it has connections that actually penetrate the cortex. And the cortex is the very upper layer of the brain. It's only 2 millimeters thick. It's an implantable system of miniature modules that are called wireless floating microelectrode arrays, or WFMA for short. And in our current trial, these are implanted in one side of the brain, in the visual portion of the brain, which is located just at the back of the head on both sides of the brain, just above where the head bends in to join the neck. The WFMA modules are about the size of the bump on the top of a AA battery. So they're about 5 millimeters in diameter and about less than a millimeter thick. And they're wireless, and they act like a miniature cell phone network that can be placed in the brain, through which we can command them to electrically stimulate the vision area of the brain through miniature electrodes. Each WFMA has 16 miniature electrodes that penetrate this 2 millimeter layer of the brain. And the electrodes are so tiny that the tips of those electrodes could be placed on a human hair, and you could put about 10 of those electrode tips on the tip of a human hair. So these are very, very tiny electrodes, highly engineered. And the purpose of this whole system is to attempt to take visual information from a camera, like a video camera, and communicate it directly to the brain, bypassing the eyes and the optic nerve for people with profound blindness, to provide a crude type of artificial vision. We have 8 institutions participating in this project. It's a pleasure to lead them. And they include the Illinois Institute of Technology, where I am at and Dr. Lane is at. The Chicago Lighthouse, our partner that is just really a superb partner for this project. The Rush University Medical Center, Johns Hopkins University, and the University of Chicago, not to name all of the groups.
Now, going back to the wireless implant, to the modules, just so that people are following us, when you mentioned the WFMA module, is that just the module that contains all of the electrodes, or is multiple modules implanted?
Yeah, each WFMA module has 16 electrodes.
Mhm.
And a group of these modules that's implanted in the brain makes up what we call the Intracortical Visual Prosthesis, or ICVP system.
Great. Now, for Dr. Lane, what is the expectation of the implant's effect on a patient? You know, in other words, and I think this is such an important question for people to know, what can the ICVP do and what can it not do for someone who is blind?
Well, that's a great question, Sandy. We hope that the ICVP will be able to provide crude artificial vision for people who have no light perception, and that perception will assist with navigation and other visually guided tasks to improve independence and safety. It's meant to be used in combination with other devices like a white cane or a leader dog. And so the combination of the two, we believe, is going to improve visual perception. It's not going to restore normal vision. So what we hear from individuals who are blind is that they would love to be able to read a newspaper or drive a car or see the face of a loved one. And it's not designed to do any of those things. Users won't be able to see, to clearly see faces. The vision will be very crude, and it's been described by Dr. Troyk as looking at the world through a kitchen colander that you use to drain noodles, and you actually have tiny holes of light that you will use to identify objects.
You know, and it's very important to make that distinction, because people, you know, really need to be aware of what it can and cannot do. So thanks so much for that that in-depth explanation. In-depth, but simple in a way.
Sure.
Now, for anyone that just joined us in this information section of the Accessible Pharmacy Services Health Expo, we are with the Chicago Lighthouse, and we are speaking with Dr. Francis Lane and Dr. Philip Troyk, and they are both talking to us about the ICVP, the Intracortical Visual Prosthesis project. Now, I do want to remind everyone that if you have any questions for us about anything that you've heard, or if you come up with any questions during the rest of the session, please add them in the chat. And if you do need closed captions, you can press the closed caption button on the bottom menu bar. Now, we spoke, you know, we've done several of these interviews, Dr. Lane and Dr. Troyk. I remember we've done several updates in the last few years. And since we last spoke, I believe it was about 1.5 years ago, you actually have a, excuse me, since the last time we spoke, you've successfully implanted someone with the ICVP device. So what can you tell us about that?
So this has been a very exciting year for us in 2022. The project origins actually date back to 1970 at the NIH. We assumed the leadership of the project in 2000, and we've now been working for over 20 years to develop the technology to a point where it was safe, it was FDA approved for a feasibility clinical trial, and we could actually make the step of putting this interface into a human and learning how well it performs and what it could do. And in February of 2022, we successfully implanted 25 of these WFMA modules into our first participant's right visual cortex. Of course, as I mentioned, each of these modules has 16 electrodes that can activate the brain and potentially provide the participant with visual perceptions that are sometimes called phosphenes, spots of light that your brain perceives. With 16 electrodes and 25 modules, we have 400 implanted electrodes. That's not a lot compared to the 10 million biological connections that you have there, but it's more electrodes than anyone's ever had. And so far, more than 100 of the implanted electrodes, when we stimulate them individually, provide the participant with some distinct phosphenes, and many others, when stimulated in larger groups of 2 or 4, provide additional phosphenes. And these perceptions can appear as either light or dark spots, because as we know, people who have vision loss have sometimes background vision noise. And they can appear as complex shapes, or they can even appear as things that are moving. And our first challenge has been to create a map so that we know where in the person's vision field each of these phosphenes appeared. And then we're looking to use the map to create simple geometric shapes that our volunteer can interpret. And so far, with shapes we've created in the computer, we've been able to have the participant identify a line moving in one direction or in another direction. And now we have prepared a more detailed map that will allow us to investigate whether we can feed live camera, video camera imagery to the implants, which are completely wirelessly communicated with over the scalp. It goes without saying, we're very pleased with these initial results. The technology has flawlessly functioned for these past 9 months, and we're now at the point of being able to look at the very first preliminary experiments on how artificial vision might be implemented.
Now, with the participant, from his perspective, and I realize that it might be too soon to really tell, but what has his experience or reactions been during the test? His or her, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so far, Sandy, the reaction's been very positive. The participant that is currently in the study is very curious. He is engages the ICVP team in questions on an ongoing basis about the device itself, but just the way we wanted someone who would participate as part of the research team. He's very interested in that. I'm sorry, the participant enjoys being engaged in pioneering type research. And so we like to think that we had set forth so many different criteria that we wanted that would identify the ideal participant. And the participant that we have so far has really been ideal for us in terms of the study.
You know, and that's actually the perfect segue, Dr. Lane, into this next part of the presentation, because I know that more participants are needed to take part in this project. But again, first of all, I do want to remind everyone that you are tuning in to the ICVP informational session. We are sharing information about the intracortical visual prosthesis. And today we are speaking with Dr. Frank Lane and Dr. Philip Troyk from the Illinois Institute of Technology. And this presentation is presented by the Chicago Lighthouse. Again, if you want to leave any questions for us, you can leave those in the chat. And if you need closed captions, you can press the closed captions button on the bottom menu bar. Now, so Dr. Lane and Dr. Troyk, you both talked about this first participant. And now that, we can call it a success in a way because the implant has been well received by the participant. So what are the next steps for the project?
So we're still recruiting other participants. The clinical trial, as approved by the FDA, is designed to include up to 5 participants. And we've been very pleased to have our first participant. We are ready for more participants, and we are looking for 4 more volunteers who could qualify to be part of the study.
And so, and we will get more into the eligibility requirements shortly, but again, now that this implantation has been successful, what is your hope? What do you hope this means for the future of the project?
Oh, okay. So sorry, I thought we were going on to another question. So, well, what we hope that it means is that you really can't tell anything scientifically or from a knowledge standpoint from having one participant. And so even though we've been pleased with the responses that we've gotten from the first participant, and the first one's that's always tough, right? Because everything you do is new, everything you do, you're worried it isn't going to work. And so getting to the point where from the surgery to the first testing, to the responses of the participant, to the technology, everything has met or exceeded our expectations. We're now at the point where right now we need to go on to more volunteers. That's really where our next step is. And we're anxious for people to learn about it and to contact us if they think they might be interested.
And what exactly are the eligibility requirements to participate in this trial?
Yes, well, participants cannot have any light perception in both eyes, but they must have had vision for at least 10 years of their life in order for the visual cortex to sufficiently develop so that they have some residual visual acuity. Participants must be older than 18 and younger than 70. And there are other requirements for participants that we look for. So for example, we want someone to be well adjusted to being blind. We want someone to have gone through some vision rehabilitation. We want the individuals to have reasonable expectations as to what the device would do. We certainly don't want anyone in the study who believes that the device would restore biological vision for obvious reasons. We want someone to be motivated by altruism and for participating in pioneering type research. As I said, the study is designed for the participant to be engaged with the team and to let us know if we're asking the right questions or we need to ask different questions. So the participants have a blanket invitation to stop us at any point and talk to us about, their experiences, but also any thoughts or ideas they have. about the device itself. And so, yeah, I think that that's probably the majority of sort of what we do from a pre-screening standpoint in terms of who would be a good eligible participant. But of course, there are, the screening process is quite in depth. And it's, you know, we look at requirements based on physical and mental health in addition to that.
So it's
So-
important to understand that there is brain surgery involved in this. Although our neurosurgeon, who is the chairman of neurosurgery at Rush University Medical Center, regards the extent of the brain surgery to be something that they do on a routine basis. So it isn't complicated brain surgery. But we can't know how such a system can provide meaningful perceptions for a recipient unless they have it. We ask them, they communicate to us, we interact with them. And so the pioneering aspect of this that Dr. Lane mentioned is extremely important. The individuals who are participating are helping us go to a place we haven't been before, because learning how to talk to the brain through a permanent interface that is there is something that we just don't have a large amount of knowledge about. But it's important to understand that this clinical trial is not a cure for blindness. It's not a restoration of vision as anyone might remember it. It's an incremental step along a long road, which is going towards marrying technology with the brain in a way to provide artificial vision that hopefully one day will be much better than the crude vision we're talking about now. This trial is helping us to better understand how to communicate artificial information to the brain. And so truly, our participants are those pioneers whose experience will guide the future technological advancement.
And, you know, in the past, I remember that you have used the analogy of an astronaut, if you will, and I think that's such a great comparison to what's going on with this project at the moment.
Yes,
Now,
indeed, that by now that we've had a successful implantation, then and we've demonstrated in one person that the surgery, the recovery is safe, and we have some positive results. Indeed, one can think of this as an analogy as the first astronauts who took that leap of faith to go and take themselves, put themselves at risk, and go to a place that humans hadn't been. This is a perceptual place that humans haven't been. And we're now testing the system to determine the limits of what we might be able to do, even with this crude technology. And we're hopeful that when others hear about the fact that we have crossed a first threshold with a first participant, they might be encouraged to take that same leap and participate as well.
now we talked about the screening process, about the eligibility requirements, but let's say that someone signs up and they go through the screening process, they are found eligible. So what can they expect if they are found eligible to participate in the study?
Well, as we talked about before, there's a two-phase process of screening. One is the pre-screening process, which is some basic questions that determine eligibility. And then there's a fairly lengthy screening process if they're found preliminarily eligible that they have to go through. And that screening consists of visual, psychological, and medical tests that are done to determine suitability for the trial. If after going through all of that, an individual is determined to be suitable for the trial, they would then go through an informed consent process where they would consent to be implanted. And that would be the next step, would be surgery and then testing after that. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Dr. Troyk.
No, I think you've covered it well. And there's a detailed listing of the inclusion and exclusion criteria for the clinical trial that's on the clinicaltrials.gov website. And so Dr. Lane will be telling us here really how interested participants could inquire or sign up. And Frank, maybe you want to give that information to the people listening.
Please.
Sure. We have a dedicated email address specifically for this project. And the email address is ICVP for Intracortical Visual Prosthesis at IIT for Illinois Institute Technology.edu. That's ICVP at IIT.edu. And if you put in the email that you're interested in learning more about the study, having some additional questions answered, all you need to do is email us and we'll be back in touch with you and talk to you more about the study and answer any questions that you have. You can also go to the main webpage for the project, which is chicagolighthouse.org/ICVP. And on that website, you will find recordings of educational sessions, frequently asked questions, information about questions other individuals have asked and we've responded to them. There's just a lot of information about the study itself, and we archive a lot of our work there so that individuals who are interested, they can follow the progression of the study, but they can also go and learn about what it is that we're doing.
Well, it's about 1:30 right now, so I do want to open up the floor for questions from the audience. Again, I know that a question came in earlier, but if anyone has additional questions, please leave it in the chat at this moment. So Dr. Lane or Dr. Troyk, would you like to answer any questions from the chat?
Sure. I see one question that came in earlier in the chat, which we did answer, but we can repeat it. The question is there an age requirement for the participant? And the answer is yes. The participant needs to be between the, they have to be older than 18 and younger than 70. And as Dr. Lane mentioned, it's important that and a requirement that the individual did have correctable vision prior to the age of 10. And the reason for that is because otherwise it's uncertain whether that area of the brain would have sufficiently developed to allow us to make the kind of interface that we would like to. So I hope that answers the question about the age requirement. And if there's other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
You know, and we've talked, this is a question from me, but we've talked about, you know, this, the ICVP involving brain surgery, and we've talked quite a bit about the WFMA modules and the, you know, the implant itself, but, you know, will people be wearing an external device, glasses, or anything of that sort?
So right now, of course, the system is laboratory based. And so external devices are not in final form. But you are correct that even if it could get to our point of deployment outside of the laboratory, the individual would need to have a camera that was mounted to their head, which these days you can get a camera on Amazon in glasses.
Absolutely.
Pretty stylish ones, actually. And then there would need to be a type of a transmitter device, antenna, if you will, that would be outside of the head over the area where the devices are implanted. That's so that we can power and communicate with these miniature little cell phone-like devices that are in the head. It's kind of like you need the cell phone antenna in order for your phone to work. So this would look like a little curved module, if you would. You might think of it kind of like looking like a yarmulke or something that might go over that area of the head that would then form the powering and antenna that could then talk to the internal devices. And then there would be a belt-worn unit that would provide the processing of the images that come from the camera in order to communicate the commands to the antenna.
But essentially, this would be, if you will, wireless technology, correct? It's not,
It's it's wireless across the scalp. So there's no wires that go outside from the inside to the outside of the body. It's when the surgery is done, the scalp is completely closed, the hair grows back, and there's no indication that there was ever any intervention.
You know, we spoke about the research, the testing. Where does that take place? At the Lighthouse, or where does it take place?
So the surgery takes place at Rush Medical University Medical Center, and it involves surgical personnel. It involves me being in the surgery room. The devices are tested immediately prior to implanting. They're tested after they're implanting, and there's confirmation of the operation of the devices before the surgeon does the final closing of the skull and the scalp. So the surgery, I have to say, was a very interesting process. And it went rather quickly. It took about 4 hours. But when we implanted the devices, we were implanting a device about every minute or minute and a half. So it's a very facile process, and the neurosurgeon does it in an extremely efficient way. And afterwards, the participant was awakened and taken to recovery.
About how big would you say the scar is?
Well, the what's called the craniotomy, which is the area that's removed of the skull, it's about the diameter of a soft drink can, if you will. So it's about that size of a section of the skull that's taken out. And then when the closing is done and the scalp is closed up, I suppose every person is slightly different, but the scar is really not visible once the hair grows back into that area. And I would imagine it's probably 2 inches, 3 inches long, something like that. I see there's a question in the chat. How far away, geographically speaking, would you accept a prospective participant? Well, that's a very interesting question, because initially when we started the trial, we thought all our participants would be from the Northern Illinois and Chicago area. That turned out to be a little bit optimistic. So we are now considering candidates that are being evaluated from across the country, and we've even considered candidates who have been from other countries. So at this point, we've had to make some adjustments to the trial to be able to navigate the geometric distances, and the person does have to spend some time in Chicago, obviously, in order to participate. That's worked out on a case-by-case basis.
Great. So if anyone has additional questions, we have about 5 minutes or so.
There's a question here that says, I imagine the external components mounted on the head are waterproof. Yes, they would have to be, because all of the hardware that's used for this goes through a rigorous testing process at a laboratory, an external laboratory that is qualified to do medical device testing qualification. And so, yes, the external components do have to be waterproof. They're not, you couldn't wear them while swimming, but they have to be what's called water resistant so that water splashing on them or going on them. Remember, the external device is not permanent. It can be removed, and it only be used when the device is in operation. When you don't have the external device mounted on the head, the devices inside are completely deactivated. There's no internal batteries, there's nothing. So there's a high level of safety with the devices because it only works if you have the external transmitter.
Hey, well, we will, if anyone has any, Dr. Lane, did you have anything to add or?
No, I didn't. Thank you.
So we have about 5 minutes or so, and we are still open for questions. We are about to wrap up this session, which, I remember being part, Dr. Lane and Dr. Troyk, I remember being part in the information seminar back in 2017 or 2018, I believe it was. And I remember the room being full here at the Lighthouse. There are so many people interested, and I remember back then it was just a conceptual thing, if you will. And so for me personally, following through in this project, through these interviews and presentations, it's definitely been pretty neat to see the project move forward and seeing that we have a participant. That's definitely
in those past
great to see.
sessions, we always had to answer the question, well, when will this come to clinical fruition for the trial? We had to answer it sincerely, but somewhat disappointing, and say, well, we hope we're 5 years away or something like this. Well, it's here now. And we're really wanting to get additional participants because we have the capability, and we need additional people to tell us what is possible about this. I see Mary Abramson put in a question. Could you describe how you test the device after surgery? Yes, the testing is, it's somewhat demanding, candidly, for the individual, because when you implant electrodes in the brain like this, you don't really know where the perceptions will be in their visual field when you stimulate. So we have to stimulate each electrode, and there's 400 of them. And then the person has to point to where they perceive something, and then we have to record that and we have to map it. So I like to say the good news is we have 400 electrodes, which is more electrodes than anyone's ever had chronically implanted for stimulation in the brain. The bad news is we have 400 electrodes, and we have to go through them one by one to figure out what is there. So every test is, in fact, has a pioneering element to it. And it's been very interesting for us to hear from our participant that some of the electrodes and some of the combinations produce identifiable and distinguishable perceptions. So some have produced whole shapes like diamonds or triangles. Others have produced moving lines. And so it's been extremely interesting to see that. And I see there's a question here for outside the US. Could you provide the website, or is there a different contact number or email address? No, I think Dr. Lane provided it. Dr. Lane, would you like to repeat the contact information for everyone here?
Sure. The email address is icvp@iit.edu. Again, that's icvp@iit.edu.
And you can also learn more at the Chicago Lighthouse website.
Yes, which is, and that address is chicagolighthouse.org/ICVP.
Great. Well, we are just about out of time, but Dr. Lane and Dr. Troyk, I would I would like to thank you both so much again for your time. We hope that everyone found this information session enlightening and interesting. And again, if you want to find out more about the ICVP, you can go to chicagolighthouse.org/ICVP. We also posted the address on the chat. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great day. Dr. Lane, Dr. Troyk, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you, Sandy.